On March 29, 1972, Elvis Presley walked into RCA Studio C in Hollywood, California, and recorded a song in a single session that would go on to be covered by more than 300 artists across 50 years. He did not write it. He had received it through one of his bodyguards, who had been handed the cut from the studio by producer Chips Moman. He was not the first to record it. Brenda Lee and Gwen McCrae had both gotten there before him. And he released it as the B-side of another single, which meant that by the standard logic of the music industry at the time, it was not even considered the main event. But it was 5 weeks after his separation from Priscilla, and when interviewer Gary James pointed out to Wayne Carson, the man who wrote the song, that most people believed Elvis was singing it about Priscilla, Carson's response was 3 words: "Well, he was." That is the center of this story. Not a chart position, not a Grammy, not the 300 covers that followed. A man walking into a recording studio 5 weeks after his marriage ended and singing a song about failing the person he loved in a voice that made everyone who heard it understand he was not performing. To understand what March of 1972 meant for Elvis Presley, you have to understand what the years before it had looked like from the inside. Elvis and Priscilla Presley had married on May 1, 1967, at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. By that point, they had been in each other's lives for 8 years, since September of 1959, when Priscilla was 14 years old and Elvis was 24 and stationed with the U.S. Army in Bad Nauheim, West Germany. Their courtship had been unconventional from the first night, complicated by the age difference, complicated by the years of long-distance relationship that followed Elvis's return to America in 1960, complicated by the move to Graceland in 1963, when Priscilla was 17 and Elvis enrolled her in high school in Memphis while she lived in his house. 8 years of all of that, and then the wedding in Las Vegas, and then Lisa Marie born the following February. From the outside, it looked like a complete life. From the inside, the structural problems had been there for a long time. Elvis was away constantly, performing in Las Vegas, touring, on a schedule that had almost nothing to do with domestic life. He had been, since the late 1950s, surrounded by an entourage of men who traveled with him everywhere, the Memphis Mafia, a floating household of bodyguards and friends and associates who were present in a way that made ordinary marriage difficult to maintain, even when both people were committed to trying. Priscilla had been trying. She had been the one who moved across the world as a teenager to be near him. She had been the one who built her entire life around his world, his schedule, his preferences, his way of being. She had enrolled at his request in karate, something Elvis loved, and in doing so had met an instructor named Mike Stone, with whom she eventually had an affair. That detail matters not because it makes Priscilla the villain of the story, but because it shows what the loneliness of a marriage that existed primarily on Elvis's terms had produced. She had taken up a hobby to please him and found inside it a relationship that gave her something she had not been getting at home. The separation was formalized in February of 1972. Priscilla left Graceland and moved back to Los Angeles. The divorce filing followed on October 18, 1972. It would be finalized on October 9, 1973. But in February of 1972, the marriage was functionally over, and Elvis was alone in Graceland with the knowledge that the woman he had spent 8 years pursuing, the woman he had married, the mother of his 4-year-old daughter, had left. 5 weeks later, he was in RCA Studio C in Hollywood, California. The song he was about to record had been written the year before, in circumstances that had nothing to do with Elvis Presley. Wayne Carson was a songwriter from Springfield, Missouri, who had written some of the most commercially successful songs of the late 1960s. The Letter, recorded by the Box Tops, had reached #1 in 1967 and become one of the biggest hits of the decade. Carson knew what a song needed to do and how to build it quickly. He wrote the bulk of Always on My Mind in 10 minutes, sitting at his kitchen table in Springfield, in a moment that came directly from his own life.
He had been away from home for weeks, stuck in Memphis on a recording project that kept extending itself beyond its original schedule. He had called his wife repeatedly to explain that he was delayed, that he was sorry, that he was thinking about her. One of those phone calls, in the specific texture of what he said and what she said back, turned into the song. He told interviewers he had told her, "Well, I know I've been gone a lot, but I've been thinking about you all the time." He went home, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote a song about a man who loved someone and never showed it well enough and knew it. He had 2 verses in the core of the melody. What he did not have was a bridge, the transitional section in the middle that a song needs to turn the corner emotionally. He brought the unfinished song to Chips Moman's studio in Memphis, where Moman told him it was strong but needed that bridge before it would work. Carson went upstairs to the studio's old piano and sat down to work it out. While he was up there, guitarist Johnny Christopher walked in, saw Carson struggling with it, and asked if he needed help. Carson said yes. Then, a few minutes later, Mark James walked through the door. Mark James was there to pick up his mail from the publishing company next door. He asked what they were working on. Carson explained. James, who the year before had watched Elvis take his failed single Suspicious Minds and turn it into a #1 record, sat down with Carson and Christopher at the piano, and the 3 of them worked out the 2-line bridge together. Then they went downstairs and cut it. The song that had started at a kitchen table in Springfield, Missouri, 10 minutes of writing that came from a delayed phone call home, was finished in a matter of hours in a Memphis studio with 3 songwriters who had all been standing in the right place at the right time. The song was passed to B.J. Thomas, who recorded it first in 1970, but that version was never officially released. It sat unreleased for more than 25 years before finally appearing on a compilation in 1996. Gwen McCrae released a version in March of 1972 under the slightly different title, You Were Always on My Mind. Brenda Lee released a version in June of 1972, which scraped to #45 on the country charts. The song had been recorded 3 times and had not broken through. And then it reached Elvis through one of his bodyguards who had received the studio cut from Chips Moman. Moman himself did not produce Elvis's recording. Their professional relationship dated back to the legendary January 1969 American Sound sessions that had produced Suspicious Minds and In the Ghetto. But by 1972, Moman was working separately. He passed the song along through an intermediary because he believed Elvis was the right artist for it, and because the song had not found its audience yet. On March 29, 1972, Elvis recorded it at RCA Studio C in Hollywood. The session musicians in the room that day are documented in the official Elvis Presley website records. James Burton on guitar, John Wilkinson on guitar, Charlie Hodge on guitar, Emery Gordy on bass, Ronnie Tutt on drums, Glenn D. Hardin on piano, and J.D. Sumner and the Stamps on backing vocals. Jerry Kerrigan added percussion overdubs, and Dennis Linde added guitar overdubs later. This was not an experimental lineup. These were the musicians Elvis had been working with for years, the people who knew his voice and his instincts well enough to follow him wherever the song went. What went on in that studio on March 29th is not documented in the same exhaustive way that the American Sound sessions of 1969 are documented. There are no detailed accounts from multiple witnesses describing the atmosphere the way there are for Suspicious Minds. What is documented is the recording itself, what Elvis did with his voice on that track, the specific quality of the vocal performance that every music critic who has written about it has described in terms of longing, of vulnerability, of a man singing something he actually needed to say.
Music critic Robert Hilburn, reviewing the track after its release, noted that it was commonly understood in Nashville and Memphis that Elvis's marital troubles had informed the recording, that the song had been practically tailored to fit his musical style and his emotional situation. Wayne Carson, in the interview where he was asked directly whether Elvis had been singing about Priscilla, did not hedge or qualify. He said, well, he was, and then he described the song in the terms he had always used for it. One long apology, he called it, from every man who had screwed up and would love nothing better than to pick up the phone and say, "Listen, honey, I could have done better, but you were always on my mind." That is what Elvis sang in RCA Studio C in Hollywood on March 29, 1972. One long apology. From a man who had not been present enough, had not shown what he felt the way he should have, had let the distance accumulate until it became something that could not be undone by wanting to undo it. He was 37 years old. His daughter, Lisa Marie, was 4. Priscilla had been gone for 5 weeks. The single was released on October 31, 1972, as the B-side of Separate Ways, a song that was itself about the end of a relationship, which meant that Elvis released 2 songs about the same failed marriage on the same single. Separate Ways was the A-side, and it reached number 20 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 10 on the country chart. But Always on My Mind, the B-side, the song that was not supposed to be the main event, reached number 9 in the United Kingdom, where it was released as the A-side. The single was certified gold in the United States for sales in excess of 1 million copies. In 1973, ITV in the United Kingdom listed it as one of the most significant recordings of Elvis's career. In 2013, it ranked number 1 in an ITV poll called The Nation's Favorite Elvis Songs, ahead of Suspicious Minds and ahead of Can't Help Falling in Love, 2 songs that are usually considered the defining recordings of his career. The 300 and more covers that followed tell their own story. Willie Nelson recorded it in 1982 and had a number 1 country hit, won a Grammy, won CMA Song of the Year in both 1982 and 1983, and turned the song into a second life entirely. Nelson's version is so well known that many people, particularly those who grew up in the 1980s, associated with him rather than with Elvis. The Pet Shop Boys recorded a synth-pop version in 1987 that reached number 1 in the United Kingdom. John Wesley Riles charted with it in 1979. The song has appeared in movies, in television shows, in commercials, in tribute concerts, on every list of great American songs that anyone has assembled in the past 5 decades. 300 versions, and Elvis's is the one that ITV's British audience voted their favorite Elvis recording of all time. Not because of production values, not because of arrangement sophistication, not because of anything technical about how it was made, because of what is audible in the voice. Because you can hear in the way Elvis sings that song that he is not performing an emotion, he is inside one. In the years after the separation, Elvis and Priscilla maintained a relationship that was, by most accounts, more functional than most divorced couples manage. They had a daughter together, and they both loved her. Priscilla attended Elvis's performances. They were photographed together at events. She later described him as kind and gracious through the divorce process, not bitter in the way that breakups often become. And Elvis, for his part, never spoke publicly about what the end of the marriage cost him. He did not give interviews about Priscilla, did not discuss the separation in the way that celebrities often discuss such things, did not make public statements about what had gone wrong. What he did instead was walk into a studio 5 weeks after she left and sing a song about a man who knew he had failed someone and wanted them to know they were always on his mind. That is the public statement he made, not a press release, not a magazine interview, not a comment to a journalist. A song, released as a B-side, almost as an afterthought, on a single whose A-side was also about the end of a marriage. And that B-side became the recording that over 1,000 miles away and 50 years later, people still vote as their favorite thing he ever did.
Wayne Carson wrote the song in 10 minutes at his kitchen table in Missouri after too many weeks away from home. Mark James walked through a door in Memphis to pick up his mail and ended up writing a 2-line bridge. The song was turned down, recorded twice without breaking through, and then handed to Elvis through a bodyguard. And Elvis recorded it in one session in Hollywood in the spring of 1972, 5 weeks after his marriage ended. He never said it was about Priscilla, but the man who wrote it said it for him. The recording is on every streaming platform. The Willie Nelson version is there too. Listen to both, one after the other. Nelson's version is masterful, warm and weathered, and full of the particular sadness of a man who has lived a long time and knows exactly what regret tastes like. But Elvis's version is something different. It is earlier in the grief. It is 5 weeks in, not 50 years. It is the voice of a man who has not yet learned how to carry what he is carrying. Go find it. Listen to what 5 weeks sounds like. If this kind of story is what brings you here, subscribe and more of them will find you. See you in the next one.